Hey guys, I created this video for you so that I can show you how to do the hand stitches we just learned in class so that you can continue practicing at home. So I've sewn them on my sample fabric I had at home. So if my sample fabric looks different than the one that I gave you in class, don't even worry about that, even in size. So I'm going to show them to you all in order according to the handout I gave to you in class. And of course, if you are looking for a particular one and you don't need to see some of them, then just use the timestamps down there below. So first, I'm going to show you the even basting stitch. Then I'm going to show you the uneven basting stitch. Then the back stitch. Then the prick stitch, also referred to as half back stitch, the running stitch, and of course the overcast stitch. And then once you have them prepared and you like one of the samples that you think came out really great, you can have them or actually attach them to your card for your sample book. And you can use double-sided tape, glue, whatever it is that you find useful for attaching. Let's begin with the even basting stitch. So I'm going to draw a line just in case this is your first time doing this and to help you out so you can count and know the size of your stitches. If you've already practiced and you don't need a line, that's fine. So I would use the marking marker that you have that disappears, but I'm just going to use my pencil because I don't really have one right here. Okay, so I drew a sewing guideline. And now what I'm going to do is mark at the 1/4 inch increments. If you already got the hang of the stitch in class, then you're good to go. You don't even have to make a line or make these line increments. I'm just doing this for those who possibly for some reason missed this part or just simply need more practice. Now, in reality, you're not going to really make these lines when doing a basting stitch. All right, here we go. Again, if you have the marking, the disappearing marker, definitely use that. Now I have my single threaded needle with a knot at the end. And for the purposes of this fabric, I now made this the front because the line is on this side. So I'm going to start from the back. And the best way I can tell you this is you're going to make believe like your needle is a car and you have to stay on the road. So here's what I do. Stay straight on the road and you're going in and out. And you're going to continue. My finger in the back guides the needle back right onto the guideline. Here we go. If you're totally new at this, you can go ahead and do one stitch at a time like this. Like you just take one in, then come out and pull the thread through. Again, you can do it one at a time if you're totally new at this and this is your first time sewing. If not, you can just go ahead and do what you're comfortable with. And of course, these increment marks help you know that you're keeping your basting stitches even. And that's your even basting stitch. And I'm going to make one more so that I bring my thread to the back. And now I'm going to end this off and secure it in. So I'm going to do just a little stitch back here where I pick up a few fibers of the fabric. I pull the needle until I created a loop there with the thread. Put the needle through the loop, pull, made a knot, and I'm going to do it one more time just to really secure it. So you want to pick up just a few of those fibers of the fabric so that you don't see it on the opposite side. And now you can trim. And this sample is now ready. If you're happy with it, you can move it along and put this in your sample book. Now I'm going to show you how to do the uneven basting stitch. So again, I'm going to draw a line just in case you need to have one yourself. And again, in reality, you probably wouldn't have a line after you practice this so many times. And the basting stitch is about 1 inch in length, but it stops at 3/4 of an inch, if that makes any sense. So the length itself is going to be 3/4 of an inch, and then the part you don't see, which is under, is 1/4 of an inch. And then again, 3/4 of an inch. So when you're marking, what you're going to do is mark at 3/4 of an inch and 1 inch, 3/4 of an inch and 1 inch, 3/4 of an inch and 1 inch, and then I'll just stop it right there. Now with my double threaded, or actually, sorry, my single threaded needle, I'm going to start on the back again, pull until the knot stops there. And now I'm going to do the same exact motion, but the stitches are much longer. Just like this. Again, staying even on the line. So what I meant before about the length of the stitch being 1 inch, it's about there, but the actual stitch here, the width is 3/4 of an inch, and then here the space in between is 1/4 of an inch. And that's what makes it uneven, but the stitches itself or themselves are even. So it can be a little bit confusing when you hear uneven stitching. Just going to finish this off and then secure it in the back. That's your uneven basting stitch. Then I'm going to bring this to the back and secure it, which in reality, this stitch is coming right out. So because of that, I'm just going to secure it in once. And cut. And that's your uneven basting stitch. Here we go. Now I'm going to show you how to sew the back stitch. Again, I'm going to use a line. And I'm going to make increments of 1/4 of an inch. Like I mentioned before, once you get really good at sewing, you don't even need increments. You're going to be really good at eyeing the length of your stitches. And of course, when creating any project or sewing anything, you can use a back stitch of any length. But for this purpose, I'm going to do 1/4 of an inch. So now with my single threaded needle, again, I'm going to start on the back of the fabric and staying straight or on the line as if my needle is a car and I'm on the road here. I'm going to move forward and go to the increment and come out. Now, instead of continuing, just like we did in the other basting stitches, before you go forward, what you want to do is you want to back up and go back in that starting point and then move forward. Again, we're going to back up into that same point and move forward. And be patient with yourself if you're just learning how to do this and it's just not coming out right. It's okay. That's why you practice. Like right there, I wasn't even in the right space. And there we go. So as you move forward, when I make projects with my students, I tell them I'm really drawing a line with my thread. So I like to use this stitch when I create projects with them, like cartoon projects, and I call it my embroidery line because I draw lines like their mouth line or their eyelash lines with this. But of course, you can use this for anything in apparel, garments, you name it. and my finger in the back, you see how I'm getting it right on the line? So my finger in the back is guiding the needle there. If it gets caught like mine is, that's totally normal. I keep all my mistakes in here just to show you no one's perfect. And again, you back it up into that same space. Continue. To that same space or spot or hole, and continue. Now that I've got to the end of my sewing guideline with just enough thread left, I didn't make my thread long enough, I'm going to secure it on the back here. And what I can do right here is make my securing knot here. Let me start that over. And put my needle through the loop. And I'm going to do that again. And that is it. Of course, it slipped out. And that's it. That is how you do your back stitch. So the front looks like this, and the back looks doubled, sort of like over each other. Now I'm going to show you how to sew the prick stitch, also referred to as the half back stitch. So depending on where or what you're sewing, these increments can be different, especially for decorative purposes. But for this class, I'm going to show it to you the way I gave you the direction for it on the rules and directions for hand sewing. So the entire stitch length is going to be about 1/4 of an inch. So the actual stitch is going to be 1/8 of an inch. Let me get closer there. So 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to start the stitch here. So I'm going to say, if you're making increment marks, here's how you're going to do it. You're going to count 1, 2, 3, make a mark there for 1/8 of an inch, then count 3/8 inch forward. 1, 2, 3, mark. 1, 2, 3, mark. 1, 2, 3, and then mark. 1, 2, 3, mark. If this doesn't make sense, do not worry. It will make sense when I sew. So I'm going to start from the back as usual. And I'm making a small stitch about 1/8 of an inch. And then I am going to, and when I made that stitch, I went backwards. So since I'm at the edge of the fabric, let me show you better here. I'm going to bring this up to the second line, increment line that I just drew. And then I'm going to make this small 1/8 of an inch stitch or prick for this very stitch, like they call it, little pricks, okay? And then we move it forward. And then you back it up just like you did in the back stitch if you mastered that. It's the same thing, but now with spaces in between. So depending on whatever you're adding this decorative stitch to, if not using it for something else, you will probably be making it at different spaces, sizes, and different prick marks, like meaning lengths in the prick marks. Now I'm going to continue until I get to the end. So it's looking like this, and the back looks like this. Don't mind those marks. That was a little mistaken. I didn't want to waste the fabric. And now that I'm finishing my prick stitch, you'll see the back looks like this. And I'm going to just secure it right in there, right on one of these fibers, like of the thread that I already have already. Actually, let me do that again. I'm going to grab just a few of the fibers of the fabric, pull, put my needle through the loop knot, and I'm going to just go right over that one more time. And you want to barely take up a few fibers so that you don't see anything on this side. And that's your prick stitch. Again, the lengths are going to vary depending on what project you're working on. Now I'm going to show you how to do a basic running stitch. So I'm going to draw my line and guidelines again for the purpose of learning how to do this, because I don't know what point you're at. Is that even straight? I'm going to say it's straight. Okay. And we're going to do in 1 inch. It's really great idea to get at least 4 or 5 stitches in there. Depending on what you're using the stitch for, you may need them smaller, but for the purpose of this course, I'm going to mark my inches there. So if you're really good at this, you don't even need to make your lines anymore. Obviously, one day you won't be drawing them, but what you can do if you're really beginning and you're learning your hand-eye coordination is you can mark the eighth increments right here, right? So if you do that and you sew with these, I'm just going to do it for another inch. You're going to get about 4 stitches in an inch. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. So again, we always start from the back. And these are evenly spaced stitches and spaces. Start from the back, always pull a thread until the knot stops on the back. And it's the same motion here. Now, when you get really good at it, you could just run it through just like I am. Or even if you're beginning, this is a really good way to keep your stitches really straight, right? So here we go. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 stitches in there. Now, if you're really new at it and you can't run through it at once, you can do 1 stitch at a time. Bring that one under. And again, 1 at a time if you're really new at it and you're practicing. But then as soon as you get the hang of it, you could just go at your pace. Actually, I'm going to make that straighter. Here we go. Then when you get really good at it, you could just start and continue. Remember, like I like to tell all my students, it's like your needle is a car and you want to stay on the road, which is your guideline that you drew. And of course, if you used your disappearing ink marker, it's going, your line is no longer going to be there. So I'm just going to continue along until I get to the end. And now that I've gotten towards the end, and I have 1 stitch there that's a little off, but I like to keep it because no one's perfect, and I love teaching my students that. Plus, if my sample was perfect, that's intimidating. So I don't like doing that to anyone. Anyway, on the back, I'm going to actually grab it through the last stitch there with a few of the fibers from the fabric. Put it through the loop, and I made a knot, and I'm just going to secure it with the second one. I'm going to cut that off in a second, and there is my running stitch. So they're evenly spaced, no matter if you look at it from the front or back. Now, the last stitch that you're going to be doing and practicing is the overcast stitch. So what I did was I folded over about an inch hem on the top. And if you have your iron handy, definitely go ahead and give it a press. If not, you can do a finger press. So the way I do it is I kind of just scratch it with my nail to create this crease, right? Where the fabric just folds right over. And then just again, for the purposes of this class and learning how to keep a nice steady stitch, we're going to do a 1/4 of an inch length. So I made my dots. So it's a 1/4 of an inch length with also a 1/4 of an inch stitch depth. So I already have gone ahead and made my little dots there at a 1/4 of an inch. So with my single threaded needle, and again, depending on the project you're doing, finishing maybe a blanket on the edge, you may have a double threaded needle. So I'm going to put my needle in through the back and go right over and come out. on the next point. And it's a really simple process. As you can see there, I pulled a little too hard. If you do that, just fix it. It'll start going on a slant on its own. It's just, you got to get the feel for it. Again, you may have to like move your fabric around. Maybe you're more comfortable this way. It depends. I'm left-handed, so everything in my life is a struggle for me. Not in a bad way, but you know what I'm saying. So here we go. This is more comfortable for me. This is the one stitch I always have to like move it around a bit, and it reminds me, oh, okay, this is the way I like to sew this one. So all I'm doing is bringing it over to the next dot, which is 1/4 of an inch. And if this happens, again, just give it a little adjusting. And that's really it with an overcast stitch. And I'm going to continue until I get to the end. So now that I've gotten to the end, what I'm going to do is do a quick end off. Well, I shouldn't say quick, but just an end off right on the back there near the bottom of my last overcast stitch. And again, and yes, I'm grabbing a few of the fibers of the fabric. And that's the overcast stitch. And here you go, front and back. Does look the same. So now what you could do with your samples, your hand stitches samples, and so far you should have 6 after you've completed them all after watching this video in class, is you can attach them to the page for your sample book. So you should have 6, and you know, once you get your page printed out and with all of your definitions in there, go ahead and tape them down. You could use glue, you could even use double stick tape. It's up to you.